Today we're going to talk about Chapter 7, Fighting the American Revolution, and the factors there that led to revolution and just the war itself. So here we go. Why did the Americans declare their independence? Well, it, let's first talk about assuming political and military authority. First of all, we know a revolution was already going on. The question was whether or not the Continental Congress would support the revolution, because not everybody was ready to break with Great Britain. You still had a significant amount of people in the or in the colonies that were royalists, and many who were revolutionaries, patriots, I guess you could say, as well as neutral. And so one of the first things that happened in 1775 after the Battle of Bunker Hill the battles of Lexington and Concord is that the Second Continental Congress assumes political authority over the revolution. And what this means is basically that a Continental Congress from now on will be sort of the leaders of the revolution. You know, it's not going to be like a bunch of people in Massachusetts are running around shooting at Brits. It's going to be Americans together, unified here. And one of the interesting things is that even though they are pursuing war with Great Britain, there's also another thing that they're trying to do is to reconcile with Great Britain. So they have two contradictory aims here. There are many in the Congress that want to completely break from Great Britain and become our own nation. There are many others that are saying, no, we're not ready to. We're going to reconcile our differences, and maybe there's a way we can work this out. So the Continental Congress now assumes military authority and starts raising up an army to defend itself against Great Britain. Later on, they draft this resolution called a Declaration on the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms to legitimize what they're trying to do. Because in the British's mind, this is a rebellion that needs to be squashed. And so America is moving closer and closer to defending their country and all-out war for independence. Eventually, the Declaration of Independence will be made, and that's what you see in this picture. Why did the Americans declare their independence? Well, there was a number of factors, but let's start out with the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775. This was a very costly battle for the British. The United States was able to basically hold its own, although technically the British won. And this development is important because it shows that this war is something that is going to last quite a while. It's not going to be an easy victory. What the British really thought they could do is they really actually thought that they could bring their ships, they could bring their men, they could bring their troops, and they could basically scare the Americans. And that would be the end of it. That's not going to happen. George Washington assumes command of the Continental Army, and he's assuming a bunch of ragtag, untrained people in order to defend against the British. And I think, George Washington probably was a realistic person. He didn't think that we could match the British pound for pound on the battlefield, so we had to develop other strategies, and that's the genius of George Washington. Even while this is going on, the Continental Congress is still going to try to pursue reconciliation with Great Britain via something called the Olive Branch Petition, which is basically, again, a way for the United States to reach out to Great Britain to settle our differences short of war. And this is interesting because war is going on at the same time that peace is trying to be had. And so it's interesting at the very beginning of the Revolutionary War how we have this sort of two-faced idea that we're going to pursue war and peace at the same time. More in-depth analysis of the revolution coming at you here. A huge factor in determining if Americans were going to declare their independence was this little pamphlet made by Thomas Paine called Common Sense. Common Sense would be one of the most widely read documents at this time that would shift public opinion in the colonies toward independence, because you got to remember, not everybody was a patriot. Probably about 1/3 of American colonists were loyalists, maybe 1/3 were neutral, and maybe 1/3 were just full-on patriots. But enough people read this pamphlet, and basically the main idea of it is it outlines why America should be independent from Great Britain. A very famous quote from Common Sense is, "Give me liberty or give me death." This is absolutely essential and important, understanding how, books and the printed media can circulate and become an important part of changing public opinion. Later on in July of 1776, we have some developments. One is a prospect of an alliance with France. France will, if we declare independence from Great Britain, decide to back us financially and militarily. This is extremely important because people who might have been on the fence in the Continental Congress knew that if we go toe-to-toe with Great Britain, there is no way that we can match them. And so with France's help, we can defeat them. And so this prospect of an alliance with France would be absolutely essential if we're actually going to go through with declaring independence. Thomas Jefferson drafts the Resolution for Independence. He's picked because he has one of the most brilliant minds in the Continental Congress. He's basically a man of tremendous intellectual ability, and he's tasked with doing this. The vote for independence takes place, and by July 4th of 1776, we have what's called the Declaration of Independence, which is, I think, the best way to understand what the Declaration of Independence really is. Let's break it down to something that most people know about. It's kind of like when if you're a parent and you have a child, and the child is ready to move out and become an independent person. It's sort of a letter to that oppressive parent saying, like, I'm moving out, I'm not going to follow your rules. From Great Britain's standpoint, this is basically an act of war and solidifies what they already knew, that this is going to be a long drawn out process, and we're going to squash this revolution as quickly as it can. Finer points of the war itself. The American strategy and the British strategy, if I go back, the American strategy is basically to not have to fight Great Britain on Great Britain's terms. Lure the redcoats into large open areas and attack them and then run away. It's called a hit and run strategy, similar to what the Vietnamese did to us in the Vietnam War. The British strategy is to, first of all, use their tremendous firepower. They have the greatest military in the world at that point, to just destroy the Americans if we don't scare them first. And That's going to be the beginning of the strategy. Now the war takes place in 3 phases. Phase 1 is up in the northern campaign. I'm not going to go into super detail about what's going on, but generally we have various places in British North America, as you can see, Quebec, Montreal, that are going to be fought on, also in upstate New York. We're going to have that. This is going to be kind of the first phase where America is going to see if they can actually fight against Great Britain. Second phase is down south there in New York and Pennsylvania. Again, nothing necessarily important happening here except this battle right here, Saratoga. And I want to go back to this. Saratoga is the turning point in the war because this is a tremendous victory by the Americans. And what happens as a result of this is that the French are going to send in help, which is going to be very, very important. Phase 3 is the southern strategy, where the British are going to try to draw on loyalist support down here in the south. And pardon me for a second, let me go back just a few different slides here to point out something. Look at the Patriot strongholds, all the blue. But look also at the loyalist strongholds. What the British government was going to try to do was they were going to go into these loyalist strongholds and try to rally the troops to their cause. They're also going to try to rally Native Americans out here on the frontier to their cause. And so Britain had a grand plan. However, it didn't work. Southern strategy failed to materialize concrete victories. And essentially, despite the fact that you have a mix of U.S. surrenders and U.S. victories, has the effect of drawing the war out. Now, the final battle is General Cornwallis's surrender right here at Yorktown. And this is very important because this is another turning point as the French fleet comes in here to basically decide the battles in the American Revolution here. So 1781 is the end of the Revolution. Now, I know I abbreviated all that, but feel free to read more in your book about the battles. I'm not concerned in this class about what battles everybody won. It's just if you kind of understand why we got into war, if you understand how we got into war and the ultimate outcome, that's fine. Another picture of Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown, also nicknamed the time when the world stood upside down. So, now the balance of power is going to be shifted in North America. And for a grand review, let's just recap everything that we have seen. The French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, leads to debt. Leads to Great Britain wanting to tax its colonists to make up that debt. Leads to increased tensions between the British and the Americans, leading to the Declaration of Independence, leading to the Revolutionary War. And the winners and losers of the Revolutionary War. I would say the American colonists won. I would say the French won by containing Great Britain here to some degree. I would also say who lost? The British. I would also say the Native Americans, as their lands are going to be encroached upon by American colonists. So in the next lecture, in chapters 8 and 9, I'll talk about the challenges that the new nation faced.